In the last episode, we looked at the emergence of Mike Bynum as one of the first people to intervene on the Ramseys' behalf after JonBenet's death. According to his account, he found them at a friend's house where Patsy was so devastated she couldn't stand until he helped her to her feet for a hug. But his presence quickly turned legal. Bynum blocked police interviews, took point on legal strategy, and essentially acted as the Ramseys' first attorney before Hatton, Morgan, and Foreman were even brought into the case. He told John Ramsey there were legal issues to handle, and John seemed to already know what he meant. When police refused to release JonBenet's body, Bynum confronted the district attorney, questioning the morality and the legality of their delay. From the very beginning, the Ramsey camp, through Bynum, was not just grieving, it was mobilizing, resisting, and maneuvering. And it set the tone for everything that followed. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And so in the last episode, as we mentioned, Bynum became a real key piece earlier on in the investigation in what seemed like his ability to block the police from actively investigating the case. And for that, we kind of note that he is a bigger focal point, or should have been a bigger focal point in the case than originally imagined. But in this episode, we want to kind of continue diving deeper into the Primetime Live interview and sort of unpack how questions about JonBenet Ramsey were repeatedly sidestepped or reframed, even as coverage focused on protecting other people's image. Where we're trying to talk about JonBenet Ramsey, the coverage kind of shifted in the media to focus on John and Patsy Ramsey, kind of going to examine how the Ramseys bypassed police channels entirely and took their defense straight to CNN, straight to the media. It was the media that was a problem, but they went straight to CNN, and setting a media first precedent that law enforcement couldn't control. We'll see that Bynum's own words suggest that he believed that the Ramseys were in a catch-22 situation, and we're going to kind of break down what he meant by that, as well as his subtle admission that the Ramseys were already in serious trouble. Bynum also makes the strange claim that he wants nothing more to do with the case, while continuing to speak and advocate publicly for the Ramseys, which raises more questions about his true role in the case. And finally, we're going to challenge a persistent myth that the FBI wasn't involved early in the case. In truth, the Boulder Police Department had already been coordinating with the FBI prior to September of 1997. And so long before the Ramseys wanted to admit. And so with that, we'll get started. Want to say once again, thank you to everybody liking and sharing and subscribing to the channel. Thank you to all my new subs. Thank you to everybody who's been here rocking with me for a long time. Thank you for those who are contributing monetarily to the channel and supporting the videos and supporting the work and whatnot. Again, you don't have to do it. I don't want to make it seem like I'm, beating you over the head for it, but I want you to know that is much appreciated. And I thoroughly enjoy, everybody's enjoying that everybody's enjoying the research. So this is kind of where we left off last time, right? Diane Sawyer is kind of talking about the things that, kind of started to showcase the Ramseys in the bad light. And she says, but of all the things that solidified suspicions against the Ramseys, probably the biggest was that the 4-month delay in granting police a formal interview. And so people want to know why. And so Bynum gave us the motivation. He says, Bynum says that the Ramseys wanted to talk. They did. They truly did. And John, if you ask John this, John is going to say, oh, we wanted to. The police. It is crazy. When I tell you the stuff that John Ramsey does, it is wild. It's crazy. And John is like, yeah, we wanted to, but anyways. And so Bynum says the Ramseys wanted to talk, but their attorneys insisted that a member of the DA's office be present. Why? But you did this. This is your idea. It's not like the police said, hey, let's have somebody from the DA present. You hired these attorneys to protect you. Nobody did this. You did it. So they said they wanted to talk, but their lawyers didn't want them to. Fleet White, prior to the funeral, said, please stop hiding behind your lawyers. Talk, speak. You had a chance to make your own decision. You can speak without the consent of counsel. You know that. All counsel can say is, I'm advising my client not to speak here. That's all they can say. But you can talk. The Ramseys know that. And so, why? He says because police were so hostile, and the DA makes the final decision on whether to prosecute. And so, the Ramseys wanted to talk. What we're taking from this is that the Ramseys wanted to talk, but the attorney said no, and the attorney said no because the police were being hostile, and they didn't want their client going in a hostile environment. But that's what you're hired for. You are a top law firm. That's what you're paid the big bucks for, to handle the hostile situation. That's why we have you here, so you can handle it for us. And he said, you know what? These people are being hostile. We don't want to deal with this. And you know what? We don't even need to deal with you. We don't need to deal with you because you're not going to make the final decision anyway. We just want to cut straight to the point and go with the people who are going to make the final decision. And that's going to be the DA's office. So why would we even talk to police? That's the reasoning here. And so Bynum is insisting that the big holdup was that the police waited so long to let the DA's office in. If you guys would have just, let the DA's office in, we could have talked. Why? So Bynum comes back and he kind of supports that idea. He says the primary issue preventing an interview for all that time, for 4 months, preventing the interview, despite everything people were told in the media, was the issue of the presence of the DA in there. But as we talked about before, the Ramseys had their lawyers. And I want to start here. What we notice, and I mentioned that what we were talking about is that what we notice immediately here is that the questions about JonBenet Ramsey are ignored and deflected in favor of shielding John and Patsy. Not from the media. John and Patsy are not being shielded from the media. The media is not the problem. Now, what we experienced later on in the case is this idea that the media just lambasted the Ramseys and just gave it to them and then all of this nonsense. It's the media's problem. It's the media's fault. But the media really wasn't the issue. From what we see here, it's the cops. We just don't like the cops. We just don't like the police. You remember, and this may be totally unrelated, but you remember when we talked about how Susan Stein, when on the 23rd of December 23rd, 1996, I believe, when Fleet White was calling around and trying to get medicine for his mother, as he said, Susan Stein, and he mistakenly called the cops. Cops showed up. Susan Stein wouldn't let the cops in the house. Now, that led me to believe on December 23rd that they were up in that house doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing. For you to come to the door and not even and speak to the cops through the door. Because, look, behavior is consistent. Let me tell you something. If I'm known to be doing some fishy stuff, you know what I mean? If I'm known to be doing some fishy stuff and the police show up at my door, I might not want to open the door. You know what I mean? We take an example from Susan Stein. If we continue with the example of Susan Stein, we take an example from Susan Stein in that Susan Susan basically, she wrote the emails and, well, the email fiasco. Let me just make sure I'm clear on that. There was an email fiasco with Susan Stein in 2003. And she was, impersonating Chief Beckner. We know all that, blah, blah, blah. She's impersonating Chief Beckner. And when the cops show up to the door, Susan doesn't want to open the door. She wants to speak to him through the door and basically tell him to go away. They're like, hey, we need to talk to you. Open the door. And Susan is like, no, I'm not opening this door. You can't come in. And Susan is just hiding behind the door. Scared, petrified of the cops. And it's like, you're a law-abiding citizen. You know what I mean? Like, you probably live in a rich part of Georgia. Like, why are you doing this? Just open the door and talk to them, see what they want. But she hides behind the door, which is similar behavior that she did several years prior in Colorado. And so it makes me think, like, think of how do I want to put this? Think of who would be the door? The cops are coming and knocking, and the DA is, I don't even know if I'd call the DA the door. But in the Ramseys case, what I'm trying to do is put it in the case of the Ramseys, right? And so the Ramseys are essentially behind the door, and they don't want to open the door for the police because it could be the case that they're scared of whatever they're doing. The police might find out. I don't know. And so they're saying that it took us 4 months to come to the table because y'all didn't want to bring the DA in. But all of this goes to say that and I want to look, where is JonBenet's name? We see JonBenet's body here. They refuse to release JonBenet's body. This entire case is about JonBenet. And as we go through, we start off on page 1 and we say, obviously the pageant about JonBenet. To this point, JonBenet is not mentioned. Sawyer brings her in. Diane Sawyer brings JonBenet in. Talk a little bit more. We're talking about Patsy lying on the floor and the Ramseys were just distraught, and John and Patsy are distraught. Sawyer again brings up JonBenet. To this point, Bynum has yet to mention JonBenet until we get down here to the release of the body of JonBenet on page 2 of 7. We keep talking. Points that we haven't even gotten to yet. Still no discussion or mention of JonBenet. Sawyer brings up JonBenet again. Blah, blah, blah. And Sawyer brings up JonBenet again. Announcer brings up JonBenet. Finally, on page 4 again, does Bynum mention JonBenet? Second time, Sawyer brings up JonBenet, and so now Bynum brings up JonBenet again. So he's mentioned her 3 times. Sawyer brings up JonBenet. On page 6 of 7, Bynum brings up JonBenet finally. Again. Continuing, Sawyer brings up JonBenet. Again. Beauty pageant. Bynum brings up JonBenet. And then brings up JonBenet again 6 to 7 times. So in this entire interview, the most that JonBenet is brought up, and this is probably 30 minutes to an hour of edited footage. Probably, I would say. Probably 30 minutes to an hour of edited footage in which Bynum is not really talking about JonBenet. He's more so worried about John and Patsy. And that was my point. We are dealing with somebody who is focusing not on JonBenet, because I say all the time, what about Burke? Now I'm asking, what about JonBenet? Because we're doing a lot of talking about how John and Patsy were doing, but we're forgetting that there's an active investigation going on for a child who was murdered in her home. And we're wondering, as the primary focal point of this investigation, how her parents are doing. That's great. They need to be checked on. But how are we going to solve this case? And this is what I'm noticing. Is not a lot of talk about JonBenet and what JonBenet went through and how we're specifically trying to find out from the friend's perspective. How we're trying to, because she's 6. JonBenet was 6. That would be just devastating. I want to go back through. So the first, you mentioned 6 or 7 times JonBenet's body for burial. Okay. And so we're looking at what context she's mentioned in. Her body for burial. And Dr. Buff doesn't say her name, I guess, from what I'm seeing. That's really weird. Straight ahead from this landing basement, actually. Oh, so he's going through showing them everything. JonBenet's body was found here. Statement of fact. Bynum, looking for something. It's directed. So where the extent, spin machine, public pressure being brought on, it's directed. Talking about how the media blitz, that's the purpose. The media blitz, the media machine, is to discover the killer of JonBenet. So mention that. I'll count that. Lightly. We'll talk about that. That's the 3rd time. Straight ahead is the landing basement, actually the room where JonBenet's body was found. Again, statement of fact, this is where she was found. Bynum, no, I've raised 4 boys, played football and baseball, and probably spent more time and effort, devotion, everything else than JonBenet. Okay, so talking about the pageants and sort of defending against John, the criticisms about JonBenet being in the pageants. Bynum says, "Dear Paul, I'm writing this letter to you, deeply hurt, betrayed. You have betrayed my daughter, JonBenet." Oh, so he's again kind of like a statement of fact here. Somebody wrote John Ramsey, or John Ramsey wrote somebody a letter about JonBenet, and John is saying, you hurt us by, misrepresenting our daughter. Yeah. So in the entire interview, 30 minutes to an hour of edited footage, in the entire interview, I want you to tell me how many times from Buff or from Bynum that JonBenet was mentioned in a sort of, in a caring light of, dang, man, you got to realize this is a 6-year-old girl, who's been murdered here. This is a 6-year-old girl who's been murdered here. And honestly and truly, it's really painful to see, because we're talking about a 6-year-old girl who had to endure such horrendous amount of pain, right? That she was going through. And in this entire interview, nothing was mentioned legitimately about the pain that JonBenet had to endure. This entire interview, as we're mentioning, was about protecting John and Patsy Ramsey. The entire interview. Can you imagine that these people are going on television and saying that this is all about JonBenet, justice for JonBenet, and to get on television and barely mention her name in any caring light. Isn't that crazy? That's wild. JonBenet was so little. She was nothing but 45 pounds. She was like 4 foot. Isn't that crazy? All this entire interview, you care so much about JonBenet, and you're telling me, hey man, I had an infant granddaughter who died. So I know what you're going through. All of you guys seem to have some sort of tragedy that happened in your family. And so you know what they're going through. But the person who actually was a victim, the person who was actually a victim of this crime, is not getting any credit, not getting any looks. Many of you on the channel have kind of pointed to the idea that, you know, John and Patsy, they rarely say JonBenet's name. They say that girl or this girl, that child, this child. Now, I'll be honest. I'm not saying that. But like we said before, I'm not saying it because I'm not trying to be nitpicky. Because if I start saying it's like, oh man, you're so nitpicky, blah, blah, blah. I'm not trying to be nitpicky. I think I do agree. It's a little bit concerning that you say this girl or that child, you know, JonBenet, my daughter. You would expect them to be using more endearing language, but it's almost like separatist language to where you say that girl, that child is. I'm not trying to be, and so I'm not going to mention. I don't want to mention too much about it because I don't want to be nitpicky like that, you know. But this ain't helping you beat the allegations. We just went through a whole. Now this ain't me. Come on, this is a full on interview where when you have the opportunity to speak on it, you had the opportunity. We gave you the opportunity publicly and on television to tell us how much you care about JonBenet. What you could have done was said, you know, Diane, thank you for this opportunity. And first of all, let me tell you this. You know, what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with a small child who was just absolutely horrendously pursued and murdered by some vicious and wild monster who is stalking and roaming the streets of Boulder, Colorado right now. And we are here to kind of make sure that he is caught. That language is not in this transcript. And it does make you question, do you truly care about JonBenet? I know you care. I know you care. I'm not questioning that. But I'm saying, do you care about JonBenet as you're telling me? Because I know you're telling me you care about JonBenet, but the actions don't follow. All I see is you sit down and say, well, I was here when I found out about her being dead. That's a fact. But what you didn't say was, when I heard it, I fell. I fell to the ground and I had to compose myself. And I lost my breath. Right? I don't hear. Judith Phillips said, my daughter couldn't sleep for weeks. Fleet Priscilla White said, my kids were affected. That was their friend. That's how, if you go look at what Fleet and Priscilla say, they say, man, that was my friend. You know, these are my friends. You know, I interacted with JonBenet, and she was a friend to my daughter. And, you know, it's crazy because we're not going to have her in our lives anymore. But Bynum is like, yo, yeah, man, I was out snowshoeing, and then they called me and I got there immediately. And the first thing I did was I hugged Patsy and I talked to John, and he didn't go over to John and say, you know what, John, I'm so sorry. You know, maybe he did, but that's not what he mentions here. You see what I'm saying? Maybe he did, because I know somebody's going to say, you don't know what he said. I don't. But what I'm getting at as what you recount, the importance, you only recount the important events, right? So what you might say is, or what you probably should have said was, well, you know, I went over to Patsy and I told her and she couldn't even get up. And I told her, I said, I'm just so sorry when JonBenet is really on your heart. And I told her, I'm just so sorry for everything that you're going through. And I picked her up and I said, give me a hug. We're going to get through this. We're going to work through this. That is genuine outpouring of love and support. Hey, we're going to get through this. I know what you're going through. I lost my granddaughter. The pain is unreal. So trust me, I get the feeling, and I'm going to be here with you every step of the way. And then what he did when he came into contact with John, instead of going over to John and throwing his arm around Jay, y'all are good friends. Instead of, because you're here, throwing his arm around John's neck and saying, look, bud, I love you, and we're going to get through this. I love you. We're going to get through this. I want you to call me if you need anything else. I'm going to be right in earshot. Don't worry about day or night, man. I'm right here for you. But we don't see Bynum recount that, because that's not important to the story. What's important is that he went over to the Ramseys and said, hey, you got legal trouble. JonBenet has been slaughtered, bludgeoned, and taken down with a rope. Her final seconds were not pleasant. She's 6. She is 6 years old. Yo, she could not defend herself. She didn't even see it coming. Happy-go-lucky. Didn't even see it coming. And she just got laid down and taken advantage of and just thrown to and fro. She was 6, man. And the first thing that you're worried about, you come in the house, is, hey, John, we got some legal business to take care of. What? What do you mean? Why is that? That's a little weird. That's what I'm saying. I could stay on this all day, but I'm going to leave it alone. That is messing with me. So we see what seems to be the case in that we're shielding John and Patsy instead of talking about JonBenet. This case was never about JonBenet. I'm trying to tell you right now. This case was never about JonBenet. So next thing in my notes, Diane Sawyer mentions that John Ramsey accepts an invitation for CNN and he accepts this. Let me finish my sentence. John Ramsey accepts an invitation for CNN and bypasses the police. But what we do know is that the Ramseys and Bynum separately told the police no to an interview prior to the funeral. But the Ramseys got on CNN and said they would do an interview. They agreed to an interview as soon as they returned, and they didn't. We are well aware that both Bynum is telling us right now that he said, no, you're not getting an interview. Get out of my face. That's what they told the cops. And John Ramsey authorized him to do so. But then, as we understand the police reports or the police updates around that time, for the same reasons that Dr. Buff will tell us when we go over what Dr. Buff is saying, Patsy was in no shape to do an interview. And so therefore, the BPD said as much in their press releases. The Ramseys are in no shape. They're telling us that they're in no shape. And essentially John, as they quoted John saying in no uncertain terms, we have no intention of coming in before the funeral. That's in the police updates. And again, this is on the internet. This is not any inside information. This is on the internet. The police updates on this case. They have a file of them. Go in there and download them and read through them. Like I said, it's a good read. It's an interesting read. You'll see some pretty interesting information. And John, by the way, John is aware of these. He's aware of the police updates. And so he knew what the police were up to every step of the way. So it's probably not that they just knew about the DNA. It's probably that they saw a police update and called and badgered them about what the results said and then got the results. That's probably what happened. And so we know that, not, and whether Mike Bynum said it or not, John Ramsey never had any intention of going in and speaking to police. And they just jumped on CNN and went with it. And that was their interview. I don't think that the media had come the next day. Yes. But I don't think the media blitz was that big of a deal, or would have been that big of a deal. For you to go on CNN, I think that's what exacerbated it. That's what I think just sent it into orbit. Because I don't think without CNN in Atlanta, without going on CNN, people were probably like, oh man, I've heard some story. I may have, just people in the area of Colorado. I may have heard something about it, and not just in Colorado, but you may have, a 6-year-old girl tonight has been, and that would have faded away. They'd been like, whoa, that's crazy. Even if people are saying, oh, but no, it's just the fact that she was a pageant queen and she just looked so different. That would have faded away. If John and Patsy would never have gone on CNN, that would have faded away, and they would have been, hey, whatever happened to that one pageant princess? What happened to her? That's how it would have went. But instead, I think the CNN interview blew it up. And then people were like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because I think they did 30 minutes to an hour. John and Patsy did like 30 minutes to an hour on CNN. Now, remember, nobody knows John and Patsy Ramsey. This is just a week after JonBenet's murder. Nobody knows these folks. Nobody really knows of these people. Whatever they know of these people is shallow. They haven't talked to the Ramseys. So whatever they know is very shallow. I don't know too much about you at all. You remember when we were talking about the Gene Hackman stuff? Everything that we know or knew would have been surface level and shallow, because we don't know anything yet. It's still coming out. That's what I think it was. And we only knew about Gene Hackman because Gene Hackman is a sensational movie. Wasn't sensational. Rest in peace, Gene Hackman and Betsy. But Gene was a sensational actor. But you imagine regular rich people like John and Patsy. Nobody's gonna be paying attention to y'all like that, because y'all are not even. You're not Bill Gates. So we wouldn't even be paying attention to you like that. You're just some random people from Colorado that have money. They're telling us you have money. I don't know if you have money or not. They're telling us. I mean, what makes you any different from any other person that I want to pay attention to on the news? I mean, they're spitting off a lot of stories about, homicides on the news. Like, what makes you any different? Oh, a child tonight is, y'all are saying that like that you turned over the videos and the photos. You guys did. You turned them over. You brought them to CNN and said, hey, here's videos and pictures of JonBenet. Because probably CNN asked, hey, do you have any videos or pictures that? And you brought them to them. You did that. The police didn't leak that. You did. I don't want to hear nothing about what the police leaked. When you started it, you brought out, oh man, you're showing my daughter in a certain light. You did. This is the thing about people. People, no matter what, they're going to formulate their own opinions, period. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. The naive, just naive thought process or mental state of John and Patsy to think that everybody would be nice to them. What world are you living in? People are going to have different opinions. And we have John and Patsy Ramsey like, oh my God. People are just so rude to us. They see a girl and they're wondering, because people have different opinions, and they're kind of looking at like, And I bet you it wasn't even about the pageant. I bet you it wasn't even that. It's just the way that it was done. I bet you people around the country would agree and say, oh, no, my daughter's in stuff like that. But they would say, but dang, I don't put that much makeup on my daughter. Or they would say, but dang, man, that, I don't put my daughter in those clothes. That's a little questionable. I don't know about that. That's a little suspect. That's probably what they would say. And that's what I'm saying. That's probably where you got hit at. That's probably where you got marked off, where you got docked on, is doing that kind of stuff. And people are like, that's not really in my wheelhouse. I don't know about you guys. And so you guys go to the media and you try to spin it. And obviously we're going to talk about that a little bit later, stuff like that. But you go to the media, you put it out there. Nobody forces you to do it. You put it out there. You make this a big deal when it probably really wasn't a big deal at all. And so you bypass the police entirely. You said you were absolutely, because I'm sick and tired of hearing John Ramsey act like he's happy to do something. Oh, I'll turn it over to you. It's been 2 years, John. It's been 2 years. When were you planning on turning those documents over? And I'm talking about something else that we'll talk about later. It's been 2 years, but let me just say this, as to make an example. Police asked them for something, and it took 2 years. They gave them some stuff. Subpoena didn't come through, but it took 2 years to get anything else. And then John was like, oh, no, absolutely. I have no problem giving that to you. It's been 2 years, bro. When were you planning on giving that to us? Hello? We're in the middle of an investigation trying to find your daughter. Hello? Do you want to help us? But see, the problem was, here's the problem. The problem was, y'all asking for information from us. Just turn it over. You asking for information from us, and for some strange and odd reason, I don't want to give it to you. Just give it to them. I mean, there's things that I don't want to do. People ask you for certain things and you don't want to do it. Just give it to them. It's like, will this clear me? Will this get me out of the way? Because they cleared your son and your daughter. Easy money. They're saying John Andrew wasn't even in town. Easy money. So when the DNA comes through, it just confirms. Even though the DNA is contaminated, we know that you weren't in town anyway. So when the DNA comes back, those are two things that we can say, well, I mean, we know the DNA is messed up, but the DNA doesn't, in the court of law, we don't have anything because the DNA doesn't prove that they were there. So I can't really say anything. I can't say too much. Right? And that's all you got. They have an alibi. DNA doesn't match, so we can't say anything. Done. Now we can start looking at other people. But you wait 2 years to turn over information. They took forever to give them the clothes that they were wearing that night or that day. They took forever to give them the clothes. Why is it taking you guys so long to do things? But then when the police are saying, could you please, this is the narrative. The police are asking you, could you please come in and now let them come in, give us information. This is literally what Lou Smith was asking. And this is your friend. And you don't want to do it. That's questionable. And so, kind of continuing in my notes here that I noticed about this article, Bynum, and this is a key point that I think is important. Bynum suggests that the Ramseys are in a catch-22. And I actually want to bring that up because he's talking about them being sort of criticized in a sense, and he says, and so let me see here. In the end, the body was released. The funeral was in Atlanta. Bynum insists that the Ramseys still didn't know what he had told police when they suddenly accepted an invitation to go to CNN. But like we just said, it don't matter what he told police because they said the same thing. He said they're not doing an interview. John Ramsey came back and told the police the same thing. How are y'all on the same page? John Ramsey was distraught and inconsolable and devastated, but he wasn't devastated enough to be on the same page as Mike Bynum, his attorney, his acting attorney at the time. Come on. Patsy Ramsey says from a CNN tape, if anyone knows anything, please help us. So Diane Sawyer asks a very straightforward question. Was it a mistake? Bynum says yes and no. What? I asked you, I'm asking you, was the death of JonBenet a mistake? Sir, do you understand the question? Or do you need, you know who Mike Bynum needed at this point? He needed Lynn Wood. Because Lynn Wood would have asked, do you understand what he's asking you? Lynn Wood would have clarified. But she's asking, so was it a mistake? You know, Bynum says yes and no at this point in time with everything that's happening to them. It's pretty difficult for them to do anything that isn't going to be criticized. If they do something, it's criticized that they did. If they don't, it's criticized that they don't. Let me make sure I get through this note. Bynum suggests that the Ramseys are in a catch-22, criticized if they did something or not. And my notes kind of say that they weren't in a catch-22. And I go on to say that there's no logical person who will criticize you for helping solve the case. There is no, and that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. There is no logical person who will criticize you for saying, hey man, you're helping the police. That's especially, you guys mentioned that people have lost faith in the American family. Patsy just said that on CNN. Lock in with me. Patsy just criticized the American family. She said people are criticizing the American family, and she mentioned that. But usually, if a person's going to mention that, then usually they're going to have sort of like a savior complex to kind of say that, yes, this is what's said, but I think we're going to handle it knowing what's out there, very cerebral, knowing what's out there, I'm going to handle it differently. We want to be upfront. We want to be honest. That is what they were saying, but that is not what they were doing. You had two examples that you mentioned, Susan Smith and O.J. Simpson, to kind of showcase that. But when you had the opportunity to help restore faith in the American family, what did you do? You said, criticize if you do, criticize if you don't. It's like catch-22. No, it's not. It's not a catch-22. If you cooperate, which you have the chance to do, you can now restore faith in that, hey, the American family is not to blame. The American family is not the problem. These monsters out here lurking on children are the problem. And you know what that does? That allows the police to say, you know, we do have a problem. We need to look more at these predators who are stalking children and so on and so forth. And we really need to look. But when you do stuff like this, to where you run away for 4 months and really, whether or not you're going to try to help find justice for your daughter is predicated on whether or not the DA is in the room, that's going to make people stop and say, well, dang, you didn't give me any more trust in the familial system than who you kind of use as the examples that you used. I am no more confident now in the familial system than I was before you made that statement. You actually hurt my perception of the family system in the United States more than ever, because you're like the third case, because now, whether I think you're good people or not, you kind of got me confused as to why you're not talking. Because even though people may not think they did it, they're kind of like, some people are like, yeah, but why are you not talking? That was initially, and we're going to talk about that, that was initially Fleet and Priscilla White's perspective. I don't think they did it, but I just don't understand why they're not talking. Just seems kind of weird to me. And it is weird because you have an opportunity. So they're not in a catch-22. You just don't want to talk. Another key point that I noticed is that Bynum alludes to the trouble that the Ramseys were in and seems to indicate under normal circumstances, he would tell people to tell the police everything I gotta find that part. This right here. Diane Sawyer says, what about this assumption on people's part that if it had been them or their child and they were innocent, they would have said, I don't care what you say, attorneys. I'm going down. I'm going to, I'm not going to just give an interview. I'm going to camp out down there and make sure they know everything I know and that they're on the trail of who did this. Nothing's going to stop me. Michael Bynum says this. I think there's nothing wrong with that approach and that idea. But I want to tell you, for anyone in the circumstance that John and Patsy Ramsey were in, you go ahead and do that and pick up the pieces later because you're going to be shredded. And I know that there are good police. I know there are good police in Boulder, Colorado. But I've also seen it from the prosecution side. I've seen it from the defense side. If a focus occurs, what that means, and it means they're coming and you better get ready. Mike, what position exactly are the Ramseys in? Because we talked about last episode how you came in guns blazing, saying that, we need to sit down, we need to talk about this, something needs to be dealt with. And the DA needs to be there if we're talking about prosecution. We haven't even talked about prosecution yet. We're not even that far in the investigation. And we're already talking about prosecution and the police being hostile and all such as that. What, I got to ask again, what situation? Because this is the second time that he's throwing me off with what he said. The first time he said, John, we got legal issues to take care of. What legal issues? What legal issues are you talking about, Mike? And now he's saying nothing's wrong with that approach, but the circumstances that John and Patsy are in, they can't do that. They can't act. Diane Sawyer is speaking for the people. And she said any normal person would have done this. But Mike Bynum says, yeah, but John and Patsy Ramsey and in a normal position. Please explain how their situation is different. They're innocent, right? And that's what Diane Sawyer says, innocent or not. I'm going to ask you again, because she asked a little bit earlier, was this a mistake? And now we have here again, she's asking. So just in another way, are they innocent or not? Bynum says, oh, absolutely, they're innocent. Diane Sawyer says, well, polygraphs, have they taken a lie detector test? I mean, it's simple stuff. Have they done that just to kind of, alleviate public perception of guilt? Bynum says, not to my knowledge. And she, Mike, you know what I'm trying to ask you. And you're giving me these one-word answers. I'm trying to have a conversation with you. And there's nothing worse than trying to have a conversation with somebody that will not talk. This ain't even the Ramseys. This is the lawyer making it difficult to talk about this case. The conversation should be more free-flowing than this. There should be a back and forth. There should be more of this and less of this. Have they taken a lie detector test? Not to my knowledge. So she probes a little bit more. Should they? Will they? Bynum says, first of all, he said, you ain't talking to police. But Bynum goes on to say, oh, Not if I have anything to say about it. They'll never take a lie detector test. Why? Why can't they take a lie detector test? And that goes back to my original question. What have you done that you can't tell the police everything that you've done? What is going on specifically in this case where you can't tell the police everything? Help me understand that. How is this case different? Please be specific. Which is where he then goes into, that's Ouija board science, number one. And I will tell you, to my knowledge, that request has not been made of John and Patsy. Look. Because you're starting to make my head hurt with this stupidity. Mike. I need a stress ball. Mike. I got a deck of cards. If they're innocent, Mike, why do people have to make a request for them to express to us their innocence? Why do we keep having to chase you down to get you to tell us everything you know? Why are we having to? I shouldn't be having to chase you down. I should not be having to come and ask you this little one word stuff. Oh, maybe, I don't know. Please, just, you know what I'm getting at. I'm trying to see where you were. If you know what somebody is getting at, then just, for the love of God, tell me what I want to know. But yet still, let me put my stress cards back. Mike Bynum continues to help shield the Ramseys, like we said before. This is not about JonBenet. This is about protecting John and Patsy. JonBenet can go kick rocks and jump in a lake for all they're concerned at this point. And I hate to say it that way, but that's really what's going on. JonBenet can go kick rocks. At this point, JonBenet forget you and your death and everything that you went through. Sorry to that man. But we got to move on with our life. And in the words of someone close to this situation, I'm just moving on with my life. So Bynum suggests that the Ramseys were in a catch-22. He alludes to the trouble that the Ramseys were in that is seemingly different from anything else. Another note that I wrote down about this interview is that Bynum is in and out, saying that he wants nothing more to do with the case aside from stopping the interview of the police. You know, he's basically saying, I'm really not trying to get involved. Then he proceeds to say that he can't allow the Ramseys to take a lie detector test. Almost a year later, right? Because this interview is in September of 1997. So we're several months shy of a year after JonBenet's death. And John and Patsy, or John at least, and Patsy has her lawyers, but John is now being represented by his firm. And they're talking about a lie detector test, and Bynum is saying that if he has anything to do with John and Patsy Ramsey taking a lie detector test, it won't happen. But you don't have anything to do with it, right? You said you didn't want anything to do with it other than to. I thought I thought that's what you said. I could be wrong. I went as their friend to help, and I felt that they should have legal advice, nothing more, nothing less. So you're the reason they got a lawyer. I'm the one. Did it occur to them first? Well, they certainly never made mention to me. Diane says, I'm trying to imagine. If I'm in the middle of agony and a friend says to me, you better get a lawyer, I think I'd go, what? Bynum says, well, and then Sawyer says, this horrible thing has happened to my child. There's a note here. Should I get a lawyer? Bynum says, well, that's not the way it happened. And so we say, do whatever you think needs to be done. And by Saturday, 2 days after the murder, police were openly hostile is essentially what you're trying to get us to believe. John and Patsy. Okay, so here it goes. Bynum says, he said the police are refusing to release the body of JonBenet. I said to the DA, is this legal? It's definitely immoral and unethical. Debatable. Because we're not just going to take your word for it just because you don't agree with it. That's debatable. We know what Linda Arndt and other detectives were doing. It's not like they were withholding the body. They were doing it because they were investigating the body. So let's be clear on that. I just was not willing to participate and facilitate or do anything other than say no. Not only no, but an emphatic no. Because you already said no. You didn't need to clarify anymore that you said no. But now you want to let us know. This is hostility from the police's side. Not only no, but emphatically no. You're not going to do an interview. You're not going to get an interview out of John and Patsy Ramsey. And you're not going to get a lie detector test if I have anything to say about it. Yeah, but that's the thing though, right? You, a year later, you're no longer involved in this. So what exactly is your role? You said you don't want to be involved, but what exactly is your role in this case? So what we know here is that even though Haddon, Morgan, and Foreman were protecting the Ramseys, it was more than just Haddon, Morgan, and Foreman. It was a team. So if you ever questioned if there was a team of individuals or how the Ramseys were so protected, we know Susan Stein, we know Pam Griffin, we know that. We know, I guess, like Linda McLean or something like that from the Geraldo Rivera show. Or I think it's the Lisa Gibbons, one of the two shows that I'm blanking on, that she called in. She was a friend and she wrote a book and stuff like that. But we have another lawyer who has never been released from his sort of pro bono work, is essentially what he was doing. Has been pro bono. Still working, even though he called Haddon, Morgan, and Foreman, he's still working on behalf and saying, essentially what he's telling you is, if it ever comes to the lie detector test, I will try to put a stop to it. I will probably call the firm and ask to meet with Harold and Brian and say, look, they don't need to do this. Why not? Why not? What's because it's junk science. So DNA was junk science at some point. Now look at it. But you're trying to prevent us and stop us from just getting because we know it's not going to go to court, but we just want a direction whether or not we should be looking at you, right? Newsflash. You took the lie detector test 4 years later and you still dang near failed. I don't agree with the take it till you pass. Why should you be allowed to take it 2 or 3? Why should you be allowed to take it like 3 times? What is this? Take it till you pass? And then be like, hey, I passed. You failed. I didn't fail. It was just inconclusive. Yeah. I get the first time that it was inconclusive, but why was it inconclusive a second time? What's going on? You're not turning anything over to the cops. standing in their way. And then when they say, are they innocent? Yes. Can you show us they're innocent? No, I'm not doing that. Okay. What do you expect the police to do here? In this case, what are they doing? Do you even, okay, just tell us right now. Just tell us right now. Stop investigating the case. And we won't look for anyone. How about that? Just tell us right now. Stop investigating. We won't look for anyone. This is nonsense. Pure foolishness. So Bynum is in and out, kind of stating that, oh, I really don't want anything to do with it, while having everything to do with it. And then the last point that I wanted to make before I close this down. The last point I wanted to make, that the police department, and let me get there. The police department has already, John, and I just, because I'm doing this, we already know this, but I'm doing this to reinforce. BPD in 1997, September of 1997, prior to September 10th, had returned from the FBI headquarters in Quantico. Vanity Fair, Ann Louise Bardock confirmed this. She said that BPD was going, the police updates, Vanity Fair confirmed this, and the police updates confirmed this. We've gone over Vanity Fair, we've gone over that article, and we've been fact checking as we go along the way with Ann Louise Bardock. It's a pretty good read. It's pretty accurate. It really is. We've, like I said, we've been going through and fact checking everything in that article, and Ann Louise did a really good job, I think, in that. So Vanity Fair's Missing Innocence by Ann Louise Bardock. Let me just restate that clearly. Vanity Fair, Missing Innocence by Ann Louise Bardock. And then the police updates that we talked about, that John is very aware of, and that he knows that the FBI went to Quantico, Virginia to meet, as it says here, and then Diane Sawyer's kind of saying the same thing. At the same time, members of the Boulder Police, a source from the DA's office said they've heard nothing about such discovery. Piece of wood was used. Oh, talking about the garrote from Patsy's paintbrush. The DA is saying we've heard nothing about the use of some like piece of wood or garrote in the killing of JonBenet. But a source in the DA's office told us they've heard nothing about such a discovery. At the same time, members of the Boulder Police and DA's office have just returned from Quantico, Virginia. So the police and the DA go to Quantico, Virginia. So y'all hear the same thing, where they reviewed their evidence with FBI experts, and the Ramseys have continued their public campaign asking for clues in the case. So here we're saying once again, that hey, the FBI is involved. And you remember that Steve Thomas, and I'll close it out with this. You remember that Steve Thomas was arguing back and forth with John about the availability of the FBI. John said he has a friend at the FBI, and he just decided not to call on that resource. And then Patsy later said some weird stuff about the FBI the morning of. We'll talk about that. But so I want to show this video because I want to shut it down again.
The house. The first question has always been, is the FBI, with its expertise in kidnapping cases, called in?
We were told the FBI was on its way and it would be a couple hours. And of course, they never came.
The Boulder police would only talk to us off camera. But retired FBI agent Ron Walker says the FBI is called in. He gets the call at 9:30 a.m. and immediately sets things in motion, sending agents to the police station to set up a command center, putting traps and traces on the Ramsey phones. When Walker, a former FBI profiler, looks at the ransom note, he makes a prediction.
Just the content of the note, the length of the note, some of the specific references in the note itself caused me to form an opinion that kidnapping was probably not the underlying motive in this particular crime. My belief was that the child would ultimately be recovered as a homicide victim.
What you say? What you say? Ron? Former FBI supervisor. Now you sat there and you heard John say the FBI never showed up, and Steve Thomas was like, yes, they did. On Larry King, Steve Thomas said, yes, they did. And John said, no, they didn't. John said, where were they? And Steve Thomas said, in your house. We have an FBI agent telling you we came and set up shop. That is described in Linda Arndt's police report. And John will tell you, yes, the people were setting me up for the wiretaps, and Linda was walking me through everything to say, John, could it be the case, and I'm just spitballing here, could it be the case that maybe the FBI was there, you just didn't know who was FBI and who was BPD? Could it be the case that you thought everybody that was there was the BPD, and you assumed because of guilt, maybe of some sort, that the FBI didn't come, and you wanted another way out? And so you said, hey, the FBI shouldn't the FBI be here? It's a kidnapping case that should trigger the FBI, right? If we do this. No, it doesn't trigger, not really, because it doesn't cross state lines. But anyways, don't worry, the BPD they got this. Police bungling. Police bungling. The police bungled right on in to the phone, and they bungled their hands right on over the number to the FBI, and they bungled their way into talking to Ron Walker. And then by extension, Ron Walker bungled his way into setting things in motion and sending his agents over, who then bungled their way over into 755 15th Street, Boulder, Colorado. And they bungled their way into the door. Somebody bungled up to the door. The police bungled up to the door while Patsy was distraught on the couch, and everybody was sitting in the living room, not moving, not saying a word, not saying a peep, don't want to do nothing, waiting for people to serve them bagels and sandwiches and probably yogurt. Making the part about yogurt up. I don't know if they had yogurt, but I saw bagels on the counter. That's why I keep mentioning it. But anyways, somebody bungled to the front door and opened the front door and bungled by letting the FBI in. And then the FBI agent that you thought was BPD bungled and put everything around you and put all the wiretaps around where they needed to go and hooked you up so you could sit there and answer the phone. Bungled. The FBI was there, buddy. They're telling you, but you won't be comforted. You won't listen. No matter, this is proof. We could tell you the FBI was in there as a law enforcement agency, the Boulder Police Department. They are telling you that the FBI was there. The FBI themselves. That's not enough. The FBI themselves can tell you, I am here. We are here. My guys are here. And we are actually the ones setting you up for the phone call. And you still wouldn't believe it. And still, to this day, John Ramsey, despite what Ron Walker said, the FBI supervisor, despite what they're saying, they're trying to blame it on the Boulder police. I can't rock with you because you keep saying the Boulder police thought this. Quantico. What was I going to say? I got to go back. The FBI they just returned where they reviewed all the evidence with the FBI experts, and the Ramseys have continued their public campaign asking for clues. The FBI said. Boulder Police Chief Tom Colby's remarks to the media on October 10th of 1997. I'm adding personnel to the investigation. We will have 3 additional investigators reassigned to the case. Kerry Weinheimer, Kim Stewart, and Michael Everett. All of them were involved in the initial days of the case, and I feel they are needed to give us enough resources to get the work completed. I made the assessment that more resources are necessary after being briefed by the team upon their return from their meetings with the FBI in Quantico. Just so we're on the same page, right? Diane Sawyer is sitting in this man's face and saying, Boulder Police and the DA have returned from Quantico, where they reviewed the evidence with the FBI experts. The police come back and say, at those meetings, we gained confirmation of the quality of work which has been done to date. We also had time to get really clear about the work that is still needed and to complete this investigation. Ron Walker said, keep doing what you're doing. Ron Walker's agency, the FBI, said, oh, we got no notes. Keep on doing what you're doing. And in fact, what you should do is keep going this direction. Look at this over here. That's what you should start looking at, this over here. That's what the FBI said. Now, John sat up here on this television broadcast, on this television program, and said, we were looking for the FBI, but they never came. You were gone for an hour and a half, right? Looking through the window, trying to see if you could see the intruder from up top. But you know what's funny? Because that's what John said. Somehow, some way you were gone for an hour and a half trying to see with the intruder, but the intruder is just too smart. Even though you were looking intently for him for an hour, somehow, some way, he escaped all of you. He escaped Fleet White, put the body in the wine cellar, and then, or whatever you want to call it, the boiler room or the non-boiler room or the whatever you want to call it. Put the body in that room, smart phantom intruder, and then escaped and had enough manners to close the window as much as he could close it behind him, to where you can only see an eighth of an inch. So you can see like, hey man, he's no. John, you said, yeah, the window is broke, but it's open an eighth of an inch. That means, so essentially what John is telling us is that even though I broke this window last summer or several months ago, when I got in, I closed it all the way behind me. That's what John is telling us. I closed it all the way behind me, flush, is what he's saying. That's what we should believe from that. He closed it flush. Now that it's open an eighth of an inch, I can recognize that because I have sharp 20/20 vision. This is what John's saying. John has sharp 20/20 vision, and he's saying, yeah, I noticed that's open. If Linda did it, don't you think that Linda would have been seen in plain sight if you're supposed to be suggesting that this person was hiding in the basement and then waited till you guys went upstairs and then snuck out the back with police swarming the place? I mean, when could they have left? Because according to you, when the police got there, we're being led to believe that the person was still in the house somewhere. And so when the police got there, they couldn't leave. The intruder couldn't leave because they had to stay, because now, dang, I stayed too long and now they've found JonBenet. Something's wrong. Or they found the note. Which begs the question, again, let's think through this. Why does the window being open matter? Right? Because the police said everything has been locked down. I don't see any issues. Why does the window open? Because if you're leading us to believe that this person must have snuck out as you were looking around, you missed it the first time, but this person must have snuck out as you guys were. Fleet came in, person must have still been stuck in the house. Fleet left, nobody else came down there. This person sneaks out the window, even with the police standing there. This person sneaks out the window and finds a way to get away, even though the police were canvassing the area. And this was Linda Hoffman in tandem with Mervyn Pugh. Okay. Or this was Bill McReynolds in tandem with Chris Wolf or his wife. Bill McReynolds can't even move that fast to be climbing through a window. He just had heart surgery. Why would he do that? Let me tell you something. We all grown here. Unless you have been active, and I know some of us are, but let me speak for me. I'm not. Unless you are active every single day of your life, climbing up a window is going to get you a little winded. If you are going to the gym and getting on the treadmill and training to climb out of windows, which I don't think criminals are doing, if you're the people that are being accused of doing this, I don't think they're doing that. People are grown, they're going about their lives, and they're just trying to maintain. Bill is just trying to enjoy his retirement. The man is 67 years old. Why would he be climbing out of the window? Because climbing out of the window is going to you're going to have to rush out of the window. You're going to have to rush through. And then Janet's going to have to climb out of the window, or Chris Wolf is going to have to climb out of the window behind you. And Chris is going to be like, yo, I'm out of here. And Bill is going to be hobbling on his cane. It can't be Bill. Murphy's going to get out. Babe, let's go. Man, I just climbed through a window. Tired. We assume that Mervyn was in perfect physical health. We don't know if that was true. We don't know that man. That man could have had a limp. Neither one of them, somebody getting left behind. If you're not in shape to be climbing through that window, first of all, second of all, that window ain't for nobody over 180 pounds. That window, Mike Bynum was like, man, I'm 5'10", 175. Exactly. Lou Smith was 5'9", 180, I believe. And Lou Smith barely fit through. Y'all better stop playing with people's intelligence. Saying that these folks are fitting through these windows and that they would have any desire to climb up through that window. Man. We're being led to believe that in the interim, where John was perched on the roof like a bird, looking around, that's what he said he was doing with his hour and a half, that, he was checking and seeing if the intruder was coming in. This is some sort of phantom intruder, because you were actively looking for the intruder, and the intruder slipped out the house right under your nose in broad daylight, apparently, and you didn't see him. Standing there watching for an hour and a half, you didn't see him. Sneaking out a window that you knew was broke, and you didn't even see him. Didn't even halfway see anything. Nobody saw anybody. Nobody saw an old man sneaking around the neighborhood with a cane or whatnot. And I'm adding the cane. I don't know if Bill McReynolds had a cane. Nobody saw him. Nobody saw a man and his wife driving around or whatever, matching the description of Linda Hoffman and Mervyn. So at that point, when you mention them, it's just, you're just randomly talking to me, just randomly throwing people out. Because even though people were there that morning, they stayed in the house, and wherever they were, they hid well enough. Maybe they hid in the crawl space well enough to not be found. And then when at the first chance y'all weren't looking, they climbed out the window and they left. Maybe when you were gone upstairs trying to find the intruder, unsuccessfully albeit, maybe that's when the FBI came. Maybe that's when they came and introduced themselves, or maybe you were eating a bagel in the kitchen, or maybe you had gone to the restroom and that's when they introduced themselves and you weren't there. Maybe that's why you didn't know the FBI had actually come. That's why, I don't know. But anyways, that's everything for this episode. And let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe, continue to comment, and let me know your thoughts. Appreciate it. Appreciate the support and everything that you guys do to kind of assist in this investigation. And take care of yourself always. Monitor your health. And until next time, take it easy.